I'm going to present this talk in three sections. So first of all, the kinds of questions I'm going to pose today: who cares about feed efficiency? What do we think about feed efficiency in the feedlot? And what about cow herd efficiency? And how do we get to measuring and understanding feed efficiency and ultimately improving feed efficiency? I'm going to give you some background now. And we're going to talk about time of increasing costs and, as Tom alluded to here and others also, that we're in a time of high cost volatility. This first slide gives you cow-calf producer inventory and returns since about 1982. And on the left-hand side, you see dollar per cow return, and on the right-hand side, the right axis is million head of cattle, and the x-axis shows 1982 through 2010. So you can see that the cattle inventory is the solid line, and then the bar graph shows the cow-calf returns. And you can see a trend here over time where as cattle inventory decreases, there is a corresponding increase in cow-calf returns. And this pattern has been repeated over the last 20 years until we come to the last few years since 2006. And here we're in a new era of higher feed costs. And you can see that this kind of inverse relationship between returns and inventory has gone away. So it seems to be consistent here with inventory dropping and returns increasing, switching about in the mid-90s, and then again repeating this pattern in the early 2000s, and then in this later period here seems to have gone totally awry. So this figure then shows cow-calf producer feed associated costs and feed as a percent of fixed costs. And you can see over the years between 82 and 2006, the average is about 62%. And in the last few years, this much higher level, up closer to 70%. We can see the price of feed increasing over time, and this slide particularly shows alfalfa hay and other hay across this same time period. And you can see a generally increasing trend, and again in 2006 through the present, we're in this new era of higher costs. As Tom mentioned, US average annual price for corn. It's been around $2.50 a bushel since 1982 through the mid-2000s, and we are now in uncharted territory. And it's not good news for anyone in this room, I'm sure. There are a number of things, of course, that are driving this changes in this new era. First of all, corn for ethanol has been a big driver of the increase in the price of feed corn. Corn for ethanol is not a sustainable technology. It's a political initiative, and I understand the need for alternative fuels, and in principle, maybe that's fair enough to push the limits to find new ways to provide fuel for ever-increasing demands. And of course, we also have the flip side where fossil fuels are ever-increasing in costs, and they are also not only impinging on agricultural industries but across the entire society. So we're in this new era. And that's one of the drivers that's out there. I don't want to be too much of a fearmonger, but the technology to use cellulosic-based ethanol production is out there and under development. And if it takes a hold and looks like it might go, I'll just pose a question and say, what effect do you think that might have on other feed prices if there becomes an alternative demand for cellulosic-based feeds? So that may not be good news for our industry also. Moving on, I just want to talk briefly about how we look at profitability and how feed prices and the cost of feed interacts with profitability. So this is a standard performance analysis that was conducted by Miller et al. In 2001 in Iowa and Illinois, 225 producers in this group. And these producers identified feed costs as the largest of 12 factors in their cost paradigm. And the variation in the cost of feed contributes 52 to 57% of the variation in profitability. So the question is, we're in an era of high volatility in feed costs. So we need to ask ourselves a couple of questions. In the industry, what do we typically control? Do we control the price we get paid for our product? Who feels as though they've got some control over the price the industry gets paid for the product? Not a lot, yeah. Generally, the industry, though, is able to control the investment in feed and other inputs. And so when we look at the cost of feed, it's a challenge, and it's a very serious challenge, but it's also an opportunity. So let's look closely at how we can improve profitability through controlling investment in feed costs. A question here for specifically for the cow-calf sector is what percentage of total cost of beef production is carried in the cow-calf sector, and the answer is around about 70%. So improving feed efficiency has benefits not only for the feedlot industry, but certainly for the cow-calf sector as well. I'm going to introduce you to some technologies that we've been developing, and this has been occurring across the world. And I'm going to talk about the strengths and weaknesses of each of the technologies that can be used in improving feed efficiency in this next section. So different measures of feed efficiency, which is best. For many years we've used gross feed efficiency, and you might also know that as feed to gain ratio, and it's simply the amount of feed consumed divided by the weight gain of an animal or a group of animals, and that gives us this gross feed efficiency or feed to gain ratio. One of the issues with feed to gain ratio is that it's highly correlated with growth rate, and it's confounded with maturity pattern, size, appetite, composition of gain, and heifer cow size. If we select for improved feed to gain ratio, so if we do take a genetics approach and select for improved feed to gain ratio, we'll select for genetically larger cattle. Larger frame size, higher intake, larger cattle. And one of the issues with that is that we end up with cattle that are outside of the grid for quality, and also there are effects on later maturing heifers and the cost of carrying heifers and the increased cost of maintaining cows, because those individual larger frame cows will eat a lot more feed to produce a calf. So there are some issues with feed to gain ratio. It's very useful if you're going to look at it as a measurement of efficiency in a feedlot, or if you're just going to look at a group of animals, and there's a lot we can do with it and a lot we can learn from it. But in terms of genetic context, there are those downsides that I just outlined. So this new measure of feed efficiency is called residual feed intake. And residual is just a mathematical term, and it speaks to the difference between what we'd expect an animal to eat and what it actually would eat. And I'll go into a little bit more detail in a moment about that. one of the nice things that we know about residual feed intake is that it's independent of growth and mature patterns. And so it doesn't have that downside that we have with the gross feed efficiency measure in terms of being able to use it as a genetic tool. Residual feed intake interpretation is a little difficult when the first that you hear of it. So positive RFI, and I'm just going to refer to this as RFI. You might have also heard of it as net feed efficiency. That term's been used in Australia and probably in Canada as well. So the positive RFI, that means that an animal's intake is higher than requirements on average in a group of similar animals. And for a negative RFI, these animals eat less, but hopefully produce the same weight gain as their contemporaries. So residual feed intake is something that's been thought about for a long time, but it's been slowly gaining traction. And I'm going to talk to you about the difference here between gross feed efficiency and residual feed intake again. So this is a group of cattle that we tested in the early 2000s from a purebred Angus breeder in southern Idaho. These are about 60 animals, all from the same year, same management group. And these are in fact steers, and we would test animals within categories. So steers, heifers, or bulls can only be tested in a group together. And this relies on measuring the individual animal intake. And so getting away from group intake and measuring individual animals. And you'll see on the x-axis here live weight gain, and this is in kilograms per day, and I'll also show in pounds per day in a moment. And on the y-axis, feed intake. So each spot here on the figure represents an animal, and here at this end of the figure, in the circle, these are the animals that would be efficient in terms of gross feed efficiency or feed to gain ratio. So these live weight gain, they're up this end, they're fast growing, and they're up the top of the feed intake measure. So they're fast growing, high intake animals, right? And look at the variability here across this population. This is normal variability within any population of animals. And I'll ask you now to look at these two animals depicted here. And this is what RFI is about. And you can see that there's a lot of scatter here across this whole figure. And there's a kind of an average line here through the middle of the figure that shows the population average for gain and intake. And so in the middle of the pack here we have two animals. And this animal here and both animals in fact are growing at about 1.45, say, kilograms per day. This is in a post-weaning test. This animal, this is on an ad-fed basis actually, this animal intake is actually around about 19 kilograms per day. And this animal's intake is around about 25.5 kilograms per day. So given that both these two animals look virtually identical, come from the same management group, similar group of sires, same managed group of dams, and you see that this variation exists in this population of animals. Who would rather have a group of animals that look like this, with this amount of gain and this amount of intake? Oh, well, who would rather have animals that look more like this? Right. So this is the concept, that this animal is actually eating less than what we would expect or predict. This would be the average here, what we predict that animal would eat in that cohort. And so that's why this negative RFI is desirable. So this one's undesirable, eats more than would be expected for its rate of gain and its its body weight. And we've done the conversion here. The circle points, we've converted to 3.2 pounds per day ADG, 40.7 versus 50.6 pounds of feed per day on those two circled animals. So the value of RFI means that we can find animals that consume less feed but weigh the same at harvest versus high RFI animals. we can obtain a reduction in feed costs without negatively affecting growth. And I haven't spoken too much about reproduction, carcass or meat quality, but we've also done a lot of work in those areas. And there's also potential for advantages in environmental outcomes. So for the same level of production, we can see reduced impact on the rangelands and reduced reduction of methane, production of manure and nitrogen. Okay, so I'm just going to give you something really quickly, a little bit of underlying information about what causes this variation in individual animal intake. And you can see that there are a whole range of different body functions that contribute. And this is work done by my friend and colleague Robert Hurd and his student Emma Richardson in Australia in 2004. And like basic I'm a physiologist, I'm interested in what's driving these things. So protein turnover drives about 37% of this variation. There's a body composition component. About 5% of the variation in RFI is due to differences in body composition. So, in fact, less efficient animals tend to be a little fatter. More efficient animals tend to be a little leaner, but it's only about 5%. But it's something that we really need to keep an eye on. There's a range of activity in animals. Less efficient animals, more active. About 10% of the variability is explained by greater activity. There's a digestibility component, so there's an interaction there between the genetics and environment and what the biota are in the animal's digestive system, and also heat increment of fermentation that's kind of tied together with digestibility. And this other here, this 27%, that's what I call, as a physiologist, job security. Okay, there's still a lot we don't know about this. So there's a lot of different components contributing to this, so it's a polygenic thing. And of course there are lots of environmental interactions. But the variation that I showed you there, that difference is 35%. And Tom mentioned he thought we could get a 10% improvement in feed efficiency in animals in the next 10 years. I think he's spot on. I think it's entirely possible. And this is the kind of variation that we can exploit. So we've talked briefly about why is a negative value indicates superior performance. That's because negative RFI, for negative RFI, an animal eats less than would be expected, and a positive RFI animal eats more than would be expected for its level of performance. And the problem with using feed conversion ratio is that it's a great tool for measuring animals in a feedlot or getting an understanding of animal performance. But in terms of genetic selection, it has those downsides that I was just speaking about. So that's kind of setting the framework and the context for the core of the talk here. And so what Nate actually asked me to talk about was, what do we know about producer understanding and adoption of RFI? So you've seen that it's really quite a complex concept. It's the first time if you're hearing about it for the first time, it's difficult to grasp. It's expensive to measure, and for producers, it's an intimidating thought to try to get their head around this and think about, man, if this might be going to improve things, but what is it going to cost me, right? So there's lots of issues around it. So we've done quite a lot of work in trying to get at producer understanding and adoption of RFI. So this project, this was a project funded by the USDA, the National Institute of Food and Agriculture, and as I said earlier, in partnership with Red Angus and with the University of Idaho. So feed efficiency research and outreach for the beef industry. This was what they call an integrated project over 4 years. 1/3 of the project is outreach and extension, and 2/3 is research. And we used Red Angus sires across crossbred females. And the bulls that were used were divergent for a measure that they have in Red Angus called the MEEPD, maintenance energy. We've tested about 300 calves, and we've followed steer progeny through slaughter. We've looked at physiological indicators, something called plasma IGF-1. I'm not going to go into that, but physiologists have to do stuff like this, but so we had both some basic and applied aspects to the project. The equipment that you need to measure RFI, this is the GrowSafe system, and we're able to group house animals and measure individual intake using RFID technology, and there's a load cell under each of those bins, and only one animal can access the system at a time. Our system in southern Idaho, we have a 4x5 system, so we have 5 of these bins per pen, and 4 pens, so we can test about 160 animals one time in that system. You're going to hear a little bit about genomics, and I'm just going to speak briefly about physiological tests. We're looking for new ways to find livestock that are superior for RFI, because in the standard test that I haven't gone into detail about it, but it's a standard post-weaning 70-day test to measure individual intake, and that's expensive. And we're looking at alternative tests. We're looking at gene markers and physiological tests. We're going to need to continue to measure animals to phenotype them in this system, with this in this measurement system to validate these marvellous new technologies that are out there and are just really starting to come to their a point where they're useful. We're looking at gene expression in muscle, and this is part of that study also, where we actually took some samples from biceps femoris muscle. Then I won't talk to you about that too much today. So this is the producer survey that I'm going to talk about in detail. And for those of you who like the feel of newly printed paper between their fingers rather than a PDF, I just brought a few reprints of this paper along. So feel free. You can see Nate or see Nate after the presentation if you want a copy of that. So the overview of this survey, the idea was to conduct a social assessment, and we wanted to, and this was done right at the beginning of this, excuse me, at the beginning of this 4-year survey, 4-year research project, and we wanted to get an understanding of baseline about what producers understood about feed efficiency and RFI particularly. So we were looking at producer willingness and the barriers to adoption of RFI. The project and survey had a national scope, and we had focus groups in Idaho and in the Red Angus Association. And I'm just going to address some key responses, and I'll just kind of go through sort of some of the demographics and some of the statistics of how this all sort of played out, this particular survey. So the survey went out to 1,888 producers. And we took a stratified random sample. Idaho Cattle Association members, 488. Red Angus Association members, took 700 of those. And Red Angus bull buyers, 700 of those. And there was a 35-question survey that got posted out with telephone follow-up. These guys really know what they're doing. The Social Sciences Research Unit at UI, wonderful to work with them as a more of a scientist focused on physiology, mechanism, etc. Working with social sciences was a whole new challenge. Got to understand I think I understand a whole lot now that I didn't understand before about social sciences. So as I said, they know what they're doing. They got a 49.9% response rate, and across those 3 groups that I just mentioned, Idaho cattlemen, Red Angus members and bull buyers, 57, 50, 45% responded. Of those, 59% were commercial cow-calf producers, 41% were seed stock or combined operations. Mean respondent age, seed stock producers were on average 52 years of age with 25 years of experience, and commercial producers were 56 years of age with about 31 years of experience. And we pooled the regions across the survey for the analysis based on NCBA regions. And here they are, west, north and south. You can see the percentages there. So this was a true national survey. 77% of the producers had British breeds exclusively, and 19% a combination of British and Continental, and a handful also of people with some tropical breeds. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, and you'll see this in the paper, and I can also send the PDF if anyone wants me to send the PDF. I'm happy to do that. So getting down into details of kind of the operations that we were working with here in this data set. Average number of cows, commercial, 223. For seed stock producers, 205. Average number of bulls, 12, 13 for commercial, 23 for seed stock producers. And so this is kind of typical cross-section of America's beef industry. You can see maybe the bottom point there, price per bull, dollar per animal. For commercial, on average, they in 2000, prior to 2008, paid $23, $25 for commercial producers, and a little over $3,000 for a seed stock producer. So we wanted to get an understanding about if people had heard about RFI and where they'd heard it from. So the question in the survey was, you know, where did you hear about RFI? And please mark all sources that apply. And these should add up to 100%. They said yes or no. But breed associations seem to be the predominant source. Weekly livestock newspaper, university extension also, so land grant system seems to be working pretty well. And lots of folks also heard about it from a neighbour or a friend. Not surprisingly, not so many read scientific journals. So what was back here prior to 2008, it was actually, I think it was the end of 2006 when we actually conducted the survey, or the beginning of 2007. Level of knowledge about the use of RFI as a measure of genetic value. And back at that time, about 24% of producers had no knowledge, 61% had no knowledge, limited knowledge, and those who were either knowledgeable or very knowledgeable, only around about 50% of the industry. And as I said, this was kind of our baseline survey for this particular project, and so we wanted to use this as our starting point to get an understanding of where we're at. This is an important question. What's the perceived willingness to pay to have bulls evaluated for RFI? So back in that earlier survey, we wanted to know the answer to this question. If the equipment to collect individual feed intake data were available to you, how much would you be willing to pay on a per head basis to have your bulls evaluated for RFI? And you can see the great majority of people didn't see much value in it. People who were willing to pay nothing, about 28%. People who thought it would be worth between $1 and $100 more per head, 51%, and everyone else, the higher categories, are diminishing rapidly. So we now move on. Given that kind of background, and the next couple of slides here are the information that's been currently in the publication process. And so this has been the follow-up survey at the end of this period here, administered in 2011, towards the end of this 4-year project. So this is the second survey, and this was a telephone survey, and these are producer responses to the question, do you think that bulls and or their semen that were evaluated for RFI and found to be more efficient should be worth more? So it's kind of slightly differently framed question, but we wanted to get into more detail because it was really clear from the initial survey that people really had little understanding of what the cost was to test animals or what the value might be in return to them. So, in response to that question, do you think bulls or semen that were evaluated and were more efficient should be worth more? We're kind of seeing a different pattern now in the responses, and about 76% said yes, it looks like it might be worth doing. Okay, so this next one gets at a similar question. So the perception of demand. amongst bull customers for feed efficiency or RFI data. So the question that was posed here was, how much demand is there amongst your bull customers for feed efficiency or RFI data? And so this was asked of seed stock producers, of course. You can see that this pattern is sort of reflective of the previous slide, and we're seeing that there is a perception of demand now for feed efficiency data and evaluation of bulls. So, moderate to a great deal of demand is by far the majority of the responses. So people in the industry seem to be seeing the value of this, and probably $7 corn has a little bit to do with it, So maybe this research was timely. This one then gets to the perceived willingness to pay. So seed stock producers' responses to this question. How much more are your buyers willing to pay for bulls evaluated for feed efficiency? So a slight different angle. About 45% of respondents said that buyers would be prepared to pay 1 to 10% more. 11 to 25% said that they would be prepared to pay 19.5% said they'd be prepared to pay 11 to 25% more. So it appears that there is some perception of the value of it, and that there may be some better understanding of what it may cost now to test bulls, and that they in fact may have some value. So to finish up, what is the cost to RFI test a bull? There are varying answers to that question, and there's still a lot of research testing going on, but the industry's getting on board, and there's quite a bit of industry testing going on now. Should an RFI tested bull be worth more? I'll leave that as an open question for you. And should we continue to research RFI and feed efficiency generally?